my classmate, 2 days before we were to graduate off of our training unit, he was killed at Otay Lakes Dam. He fell off a cliff 120 feet, was killed instantly. Shortly after that, there began rumors that he was actually pushed off the cliff and murdered. I had a couple of very weird incidents with my radio at his time of death. I was off duty that night. I was actually sick, and I had some weird beeping that started taking place on my radio at his time of death. I didn't know he had died at the time. I found out the next day he died. Then the night of his memorial service, we were off duty that night as well. And my radio did the very same thing again. It was like a distress call coming from my radio. And it was at the exact time of his death. I carried that radio for several years after that, and those were the only 2 nights that ever happened. Then a few months later, his ghost or apparition began to appear on Otay Mountain. And it continued to appear for about 7 months. And the apparition actually worked its way across the mountain toward Otay Lakes Dam. I have about 10 different encounters that I documented, the dates they happened, the time they happened, and the places that they happened. I know there were several other encounters concerning this agent that was killed. The illegal aliens began to call him the Phantom Agent. They knew him by name. Once there's one account of him approaching them, carrying his head in his hands, and he talked to them in every instance. He would actually stop the group, make the group stay there until other agents arrived on scene and took them into custody. It was probably the most bizarre series of events in the history of the Border Patrol. It all led to a final encounter that took place on Otay Lakes Dam. It did result in the death of 1 or 2 aliens, and one of those was probably a smuggler. It was even theorized later by someone that that smuggler that was killed on the dam that night may have been the one that pushed Agent Santiago off of that cliff that night. After that encounter, there were no more encounters of that apparition. I worked there another 11 years after that, and I never heard of a single encounter after that day. The aliens and the smugglers themselves began to avoid the areas that he was known to be haunting, and even some of the agents began to avoid working those areas. There could be some reports on this one because this one was very common knowledge and it was talked about in the open. This was the only time I ever heard of a paranormal event being talked about out in the open. Everyone virtually knew of it. Even mid-level management was even talking about it and talking about some of the experience that they had concerning this incident. The final encounter that did result in death, and because of the death that resulted from it and several injuries, actually six aliens were chased over that cliff, and they claimed that they were chased over by, according to the FBI said they were chased over by a live agent, but they were never able to identify an agent. They had one picked out that they were trying to pin it on, and their investigation actually cleared him. They run all kind of tests on him for paraffin to see if he had fired a weapon that night, see if his weapon had been fired. Everything cleared him. And he was the only person that was anywhere near that area that could have been involved. Supposedly, the FBI's investigation was ended when the surviving aliens were shown a picture of the deceased agent without being told that this agent was deceased. And the FBI also did not know the agent was deceased. And this picture was presented to them of Luis Santiago. And the surviving aliens all identified him as the one that chased them over the cliff, causing the death. And then at that point, the FBI wanted to arrest him. And the agents assisting in the investigation said, well, we can't do that because this agent died on that cliff last year. And that was the end of the investigation. Nobody was ever arrested, and it went nowhere after that.